The winter wind howled across the Nebraska plains like a wounded animal, bringing with it the sting of tiny ice crystals that bit at exposed skin and turned breath to frozen clouds. December 1874 was proving to be one of the harshest on record, the kind of cold that could kill a man in hours if he found himself stranded without shelter. Drifting snow had already obscured the narrow trail leading to Daniel Blackwood's homestead, a modest cabin nestled against a copse of pines that provided some small measure of protection from the relentless elements. Daniel pulled his coat tighter around his broad shoulders as he urged his chestnut gelding through the deepening drifts. At 32, he'd weathered 8 Nebraska winters, each one testing his resolve to carve out a life in this unforgiving territory. The cattle had been moved to the sheltered southern pasture, extra feed stockpiled in the barn, and firewood stacked high against the cabin's western wall. He'd ridden into town for last-minute supplies, never expecting to be caught in the sudden squall that descended without warning from the northwest. The fading light made navigation treacherous, but Daniel trusted his horse to find the way home. Snowflakes clung to his dark beard and the brim of his hat as he squinted against the wind. The temperature was dropping rapidly, turning this from a mere inconvenience to a potentially deadly situation. He'd seen strong men succumb to such conditions, their bodies discovered days later, frozen in attitudes of desperate prayer. It was then that he saw a smudge of movement against the endless white, a darker shape struggling forward against the wind. At first he thought it might be a deer or perhaps a wolf, but as he drew closer, the shape resolved itself into something unmistakably human. A figure, hunched and small, trudging through knee-deep snow with painfully slow progress. "Hello there," Daniel called out, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. He guided his horse closer, concern overriding caution. Strangers in these parts could mean trouble, but no one deserved to die in a blizzard. "You need help." The figure stopped and turned, and Daniel felt his heart seize in his chest. It was a woman, her face nearly blue with cold, her lips cracked and bleeding. But what struck him most was the bundle clutched desperately to her chest, a small shape wrapped in what appeared to be nothing more than tattered rags. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. Her eyes, the color of summer skies, stood out starkly against her pale, frost-nipped face. "Help us." Daniel dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots sinking deep into the snow. Up close, he could see that she was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with honey-colored hair escaping from beneath a threadbare shawl. The bundle in her arms moved slightly, and a tiny, pitiful cry rose above the wind's moan. "Good Lord," Daniel muttered, quickly unbuttoning his heavy buffalo coat. Without hesitation, he wrapped it around both the woman and the child, his large hands gentle as he secured the warmth around them. "My place is just over that rise. Can you hold on a bit longer?" The woman nodded weakly, her eyes filled with both gratitude and fear. Daniel helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her, one arm securing her against him while the other held the reins. He could feel her trembling violently against his chest, the baby nestled between them. "I'm Daniel Blackwood," he said close to her ear as he turned the horse toward home. "You're safe now." "Sarah," she managed through chattering teeth. "Sarah Mitchell, and this is Emma." Daniel urged his horse forward, feeling an unfamiliar protectiveness surge through him. "Hold on tight, Sarah Mitchell. Just hold on." The cabin appeared through the swirling snow like a beacon, the single window glowing with the light of the lamp Daniel had left burning. He dismounted quickly, lifting Sarah and the baby down with care before leading them to the door. Inside, the warmth of the banked fire washed over them, and Sarah swayed dangerously. her strength finally giving out now that safety was at hand. Daniel caught her before she could fall, sweeping both mother and child into his arms and carrying them to the chair nearest the fireplace. He stoked the flames to life, adding logs until the fire roared, then turned his attention back to his unexpected guests. "Let me see the little one," he said gently, reaching for the bundle. Sarah's arms tightened instinctively around her child, her eyes suddenly wary. "I won't hurt her," Daniel assured her, "but we need to get her warm. Both of you." After a moment's hesitation, Sarah loosened her grip, allowing Daniel to carefully unwrap the baby. Emma couldn't have been more than a few months old, her tiny face pinched with cold but, miraculously, still pink with life. Her wispy blonde hair was damp with melted snow, and her small fists were clenched tight against the cold. "She's beautiful," Daniel said softly, rewrapping the child in a clean blanket he pulled from a chest near the bed. "And strong, too, to have survived that cold." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know what else to do. We've been walking for days. I thought we would die out there." Daniel handed Emma back to her mother, then busied himself heating water for tea. "You're safe now," he repeated. "Rest. We'll talk when you're ready." As the night deepened and the storm raged outside, Daniel made a simple meal of beans and bacon, watching as Sarah ate cautiously at first, then with increasing hunger. The baby had been fed, changed into a makeshift diaper fashioned from one of Daniel's clean shirts, and now slept peacefully in her mother's arms. Sarah's story emerged in fragments, between bites of food and sips of hot tea. She had been married to a farmer from Missouri who had died suddenly of fever the previous spring. His family, never fond of the girl their son had brought home, had made it clear she wasn't welcome to stay. With no family of her own and a baby on the way, Sarah had taken what little money she had and headed west, following rumors of work in the growing towns of Nebraska. "I found a position as a cook's helper in a boarding house in Willow Creek," she explained, her voice stronger now that warmth and food had revived her. "It was good for a while. Emma was born there, and Mrs. Benson, the owner, let me keep her with me in the kitchen. But then Mr. Benson started. He started coming around too much." Daniel's jaw tightened as he understood what she wasn't saying. "He bothered you?" Sarah nodded, her eyes downcast. "His wife noticed. She accused me of encouraging him, told me to leave with no pay and no reference. That was 3 days ago. I thought I could make it to the next town, but then the snow came." Daniel rose and added another log to the fire, using the moment to compose himself. The thought of this young woman and her baby trudging through the deadly cold stirred something primal in him, a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. "You'll stay here," he said firmly when he turned back to her. "At least until the weather breaks. Then we can figure out what's next." Relief flooded Sarah's face, followed quickly by caution. "I don't want to impose, and I should warn you that Mr. Benson might come looking for me. He wasn't happy when I rejected his advances." Daniel's expression hardened. "Let him come. This is my land, my home. You're under my protection now, and that means something in these parts." For the first time since he'd found her, Sarah smiled, a small, tentative curving of her lips that transformed her face from merely pretty to strikingly beautiful. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." "Daniel," he corrected, suddenly aware of how long it had been since a woman had graced his home with her presence. Just Daniel. That night, Daniel gave up his bed to Sarah and Emma, making himself a pallet on the floor near the fire. As he lay listening to the storm's fury outside and the soft breathing of his guests, he wondered at the strange turn his solitary life had taken in the space of a few hours. He had ridden out alone and returned with a woman and child in his care, a woman whose quiet courage in the face of hardship stirred something deep within him. It was too soon for such thoughts, he told himself sternly. She was vulnerable, frightened, in need of shelter rather than complications. Yet as sleep finally claimed him, Daniel couldn't help but feel that something significant had changed in his world, as surely as if the storm had altered the very landscape outside his door. Morning dawned bright and clear, the storm having blown itself out during the night. The world outside the cabin window was transformed, buried under feet of pristine snow that sparkled blindingly in the sunlight. Daniel woke early, stoking the fire and preparing a breakfast of corn cakes and coffee before Sarah stirred. She emerged from the bed with Emma in her arms, her hair loose around her shoulders and her cheeks flushed with sleep. The sight of her caught Daniel off guard, and he nearly dropped the coffee pot he was holding. "Good morning," Sarah said softly, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. "I hope we didn't oversleep." "Not at all," Daniel replied, recovering his composure. "Coffee's hot and breakfast is nearly ready. How's the little one this morning?" As if in answer, Emma gave a gurgling coo, her tiny hands waving in the air. The baby looked markedly better than she had the previous night, her face rounded with contentment rather than pinched with cold. "She slept through the night," Sarah said, wonder in her voice. "That's a first. I think she felt safe." The simple statement touched Daniel deeply. He busied himself with serving breakfast, keeping his voice casual as he outlined the day ahead. "I need to check on the cattle, make sure they weathered the storm. After that, I thought I might help you settle in a bit better. There's an old trunk with some of my mother's things that might fit you." Sarah looked up from feeding Emma, her eyes wide. "Your mother's?" "Oh, I couldn't possibly. They're just sitting there," Daniel interrupted gently. "She'd want them used. She was about your size, I think." The truth was that Daniel's mother had been dead for 15 years, and he'd carried her trunk with him from Illinois to Nebraska, more out of duty than sentiment. He'd barely known the woman, who'd succumbed to consumption when he was just a boy, leaving him and his father to manage alone until the elder Blackwood followed her to the grave 10 years later. After breakfast, Daniel bundled up and headed out to tend to his livestock, leaving Sarah and Emma in the warmth of the cabin. The simple domestic scene he'd left behind, Sarah washing dishes with Emma settled in a nest of blankets nearby, stayed with him as he trudged through the snow to the sheltered pasture where his small herd of cattle huddled together for warmth. To his relief, all 27 head had survived, though they regarded him balefully as he broke the ice on their water trough and distributed hay. His 2 horses and mule had fared well in the barn, protected from the worst of the storm. As he worked, Daniel found himself hurrying through chores that he usually performed with methodical patience, eager to return to the cabin and its new occupants. When he finally stamped the snow from his boots and stepped back inside, he was greeted by the unfamiliar and enticing smell of baking bread. Sarah looked up from the table where she was kneading dough, flour dusting her borrowed dress, a simple blue calico that had indeed been his mother's. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the ingredients spread before her. "I found flour and yeast, and I wanted to do something to thank you for taking us in." Daniel hung his coat by the door, aware suddenly of how stark and utilitarian his home had been before her arrival. "Mind. It smells like heaven in here." Sarah smiled, and Daniel found himself wanting to make her smile again. "I used to bake for the boarding house," she explained. "Mrs. Benson said my bread was what kept the regular boarders coming back. Well, Mrs. Benson's loss is my gain," Daniel said, moving to the fireplace to warm his hands. He glanced at Emma, who was awake and gazing around with bright, curious eyes. "How's she doing today?" Hungry as a bear and twice as vocal about it, Sarah laughed. She's making up for lost time, I think. On impulse, Daniel reached down and offered his finger to the baby, who grasped it with surprising strength. She's got a good grip, going to be strong like her mama. The compliment brought a blush to Sarah's cheeks, and she ducked her head, focusing on the bread dough. We've imposed on you enough. Once the snow melts a bit, we should move on. Where would you go? Daniel asked, keeping his tone neutral, though the thought of them leaving sent an unexpected pang through him. Sarah's hands stilled on the dough. I don't know. The next town, I suppose. Fine work somehow. It's 30 miles to the next settlement, Daniel said, through rough country, and winter's just beginning. He hesitated, then plunged ahead. Stay, at least until spring. I could use the help around here, and you and Emma need a safe place. Sarah looked up, her eyes searching his face. Why would you do that? You don't even know us. Daniel considered his answer carefully. I know enough. I know you're brave and resourceful. I know you'd risk your life to protect your daughter. And I know that in 8 years of living on this homestead, yesterday was the first time it's felt like a home rather than just a place to sleep. The honesty of his words surprised them both. Sarah's eyes widened, and for a moment, Daniel feared he'd said too much, too soon. But then she nodded slowly. Until spring, she agreed softly, and I'll earn our keep. I can cook, clean, so whatever you need. We'll figure it out together, Daniel promised, relief washing through him, day by day. And so began a new chapter in the life of Daniel Blackwood's homestead. The days following the storm settled into a rhythm unlike anything Daniel had known before. Mornings began with breakfast together, the cabin filled with the domestic sounds of Emma's babbling and Sarah's gentle responses. Daniel would tend to the outdoor work, caring for the livestock, repairing fences buried under snow, cutting and splitting more firewood, while Sarah transformed the interior of his home. She cleaned corners that hadn't seen a broom in years, rearranged furniture to create more open space, and used ingenuity to fashion a crude cradle for Emma from a wooden box lined with soft blankets. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Daniel often whittling or mending harness while Sarah sewed or knitted with yarn she'd unraveled from an old sweater he never wore. They talked during these quiet times, sharing stories of their lives before chance had brought them together. Daniel spoke of his journey west after his father's death, of the back-breaking work of establishing his claim, of the loneliness that he'd never acknowledged even to himself until now. Sarah told him of her childhood in a small Kentucky town, her hasty marriage to escape a stepfather's cruelty, and her dreams of providing Emma with the stable, loving home she herself had never known. As December gave way to January, their conversations deepened, revealing more of themselves to each other. Daniel found himself captivated by Sarah's quiet strength, her ability to find joy in small things despite the hardships she'd endured. For her part, Sarah grew to appreciate Daniel's steadfast nature, his gentle way with Emma, and the respect with which he treated both of them. One evening, as a particularly fierce January storm rattled the cabin windows, Daniel returned from the barn to find Sarah standing at the table, a look of dismay on her face as she examined Emma's few clothes. "What's wrong?" he asked, stamping snow from his boots. Sarah held up a tiny gown, its fabric worn thin and patched in several places. "She's growing so fast. Soon she won't have anything to wear, and I've used every scrap of fabric I could find." Daniel hung his coat and crossed to the trunk that held the last of his personal possessions. From the bottom, he withdrew a shirt of fine cotton, one he'd purchased years ago for special occasions but had rarely worn. "Would this do?" he asked, offering it to Sarah. "It's good material." Sarah touched the shirt reverently. "Daniel, this is too fine to cut up for baby clothes." "What use do I have for it out here?" he countered. "Better it should keep Emma warm." Impulsively, Sarah rose on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to his cheek, her lips warm against his cold skin. "You're a good man, Daniel Blackwood." The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Daniel's hand rose of its own accord to touch her cheek, and Sarah didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "Sarah," he began, his voice rough with emotion. A sharp cry from Emma broke the spell. Sarah stepped back, her cheeks flushed, and hurried to attend to the baby. Daniel stood rooted to the spot, his heart pounding as if he'd run a great distance. Something had shifted between them, something he had no name for but recognized as precious and fragile. As January surrendered to February, the weather moderated enough for occasional trips into town. Daniel made the journey alone the first time, acutely aware of Sarah's fear that Mr. Benson might still be looking for her. In town, he listened carefully to the gossip at the general store, but heard no mention of a missing cook's helper or a man searching for a young woman and her baby. He returned with supplies, seeds for spring planting, and a length of cheerful yellow calico that brought tears to Sarah's eyes when he presented it to her. "For Emma," he said gruffly, embarrassed by her emotional response. "And maybe something for yourself too, if there's enough." Sarah fingered the fabric, her smile wobbling. "No one's given me a gift in, I can't remember how long." Daniel's heart constricted at the simple statement. "Well, get used to it," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "A man's got a right to spoil his family." The word slipped out before he could stop it, hanging in the air between them. Sarah's eyes met his, questioning and hopeful all at once. "Is that what we are, Daniel?" she asked softly. "Your family," Daniel took a deep breath. "If you want to be." "I know it hasn't been long and I'm not asking for any promises, but I can't imagine this place without you and Emma anymore. I don't want to." Sarah set the fabric aside and crossed to him, her hands reaching for his. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of what might happen to us, afraid to trust anyone again. But from the moment you wrapped us in your coat, I felt something I thought was lost forever." "What's that?" Daniel asked, his fingers tightening around hers. "Hope," Sarah answered simply. "You gave us hope, Daniel, and now I think perhaps you're giving us love too." Daniel pulled her gently to him, his arms encircling her slender form. "I do love you, Sarah Mitchell. You and Emma both. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing in that blizzard, holding your baby close, refusing to give up even when all hope seemed lost." Sarah's arms slid around his waist, her head resting against his chest. "I love you too," she murmured. "You've shown me what a good man truly is." Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened into something more urgent, years of loneliness melting away in the warmth of newfound love. They broke apart only when Emma announced her presence with a demanding cry, and they both laughed, the joy of the moment undiminished. "She has excellent timing," Daniel observed wryly. Sarah smiled up at him, her eyes shining. "She's reminding us that she's part of this too." Daniel stroked Emma's downy head as Sarah lifted her from the cradle. "The most important part," he agreed. "Without her, you might never have come this way." The days that followed were filled with a new sweetness, their growing love adding depth and meaning to the simple routines of daily life. Daniel found himself whistling as he worked, his steps lighter, his heart full. Sarah blossomed under his admiration, her confidence growing as she realized that his respect and affection were genuine and unwavering. Emma thrived in the stable environment, her personality emerging more each day. She had her mother's blue eyes and sunny disposition, But Daniel liked to think she had something of his determination too, particularly when she set her mind to reaching a toy just beyond her grasp. By mid-February, Daniel's trips to town had become more frequent, though he remained vigilant for any sign of trouble. On one such visit, he spent longer than usual at the general store, returning with more supplies than seemed necessary for their small household. Sarah raised an eyebrow at the excess, but Daniel merely smiled mysteriously and stored the packages away. That evening, after Emma had been settled for the night, Daniel took Sarah's hand and led her to the fireplace. The flames cast a warm glow over the cabin, making it feel snug and intimate despite the wind that whistled around the eaves. "I've been thinking," Daniel began, suddenly nervous despite all his planning. "About the future, about us." Sarah squeezed his hand encouragingly. "I've been thinking about that too." Daniel nodded, drawing strength from her steady gaze. "When I came west, I had nothing but dreams and determination. I wanted land of my own, a place where I could build something lasting. But until you and Emma came into my life, I didn't realize what was missing." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, holding it in his closed fist for a moment before opening his hand to reveal a simple gold band. "This was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of value I have from my past. I'd like it to be part of my future, our future, if you'll have me." Sarah's eyes widened, her free hand rising to her lips. "Daniel, are you asking?" "I'm asking you to be my wife," Daniel confirmed, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "To let me be Emma's father in every way that matters. To build a life together right here if that's what you want." Tears spilled from Sarah's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it. To being your wife, to making this our home, to giving Emma the father she deserves." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, his own vision blurring as he bent to kiss her. In that moment, the howling wind outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the crackling fire and the sound of their mingled breath as they embraced, sealing their promise to each other. "When?" Sarah asked when they finally pulled apart. "When should we marry?" "As soon as the minister can get here from town," Daniel answered promptly. "I spoke with him today. He's willing to come out next week if the weather holds." Sarah laughed in delight. "You were that sure of my answer," Daniel grinned, feeling younger and lighter than he had in years. "I was hoping," he corrected, "and planning for the best while prepared for the worst, like any good farmer." The following week passed in a flurry of preparations. Sarah worked tirelessly on a new dress from the yellow calico, refusing to let Daniel see it until the wedding day. Daniel, for his part, cleaned and repaired the cabin with renewed energy, determined that their home should be as perfect as possible for the ceremony. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and unexpectedly mild for February, as if nature itself approved of their union. The minister arrived mid-morning, accompanied by the storekeeper and his wife, who had agreed to serve as witnesses. Sarah had decorated the cabin with pine boughs that filled the air with their fresh scent, and Emma, dressed in a new gown made from Daniel's fine shirt, watched the proceedings with solemn interest from the storekeeper's wife's arms. When Sarah emerged from behind the privacy screen they'd rigged in the corner, Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The yellow dress, simply cut but expertly sewn, complemented her honey-colored hair and brought out the gold flecks in her blue eyes. She had twisted her hair up and secured it with a sprig of dried lavender, her only adornment besides his mother's ring. "You're beautiful," Daniel murmured as she came to stand beside him before the minister. Sarah's answering smile was radiant. "And you're handsome," she whispered, taking in his clean-shaven face and best shirt, pressed carefully for the occasion. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. the minister's words solemn as Daniel and Sarah pledged their lives to each other. When they were pronounced husband and wife, Daniel pulled Sarah into a kiss that drew chuckles from their small audience and a delighted squeal from Emma. The storekeeper's wife had brought a cake for the occasion, and they shared a simple meal together before the visitors departed, leaving the newly formed family to their privacy. As twilight settled over the homestead, Daniel built up the fire while Sarah put Emma to bed, her soft lullaby floating across the cabin. When she returned to his side, Daniel pulled her into his arms, still marveling that this remarkable woman was now his wife. "Happy?" he asked, searching her face. Sarah's answer was to rise on tiptoe and kiss him, her arms winding around his neck with a new boldness. "More than I ever thought possible," she murmured against his lips. That night, as they lay together in the bed that was now truly theirs, Daniel held Sarah close and made silent promises to her and to the sleeping child across the room. He would protect them, provide for them, love them with every breath in his body. The solitary life he had known was gone, replaced by something infinitely richer and more challenging. As winter grudgingly gave way to spring, the Blackwood homestead underwent a transformation. Daniel added a room to the cabin, working tirelessly in the lengthening days to provide more space for their growing family. Sarah planted a garden with the seeds Daniel had purchased, adding herbs and flowers to the practical vegetables he had always grown. Emma learned to crawl and then to pull herself up, exploring her expanding world with fearless curiosity. She called Daniel Da without prompting, a sound that never failed to bring a lump to his throat. To Emma, there had never been any other father, and Daniel vowed that she would never have reason to feel the lack. In early April, as the first wildflowers began to dot the prairie, Sarah shared news that completed their happiness. She was expecting a child, due to arrive as the summer waned. Daniel's joy knew no bounds as he swept her into his arms, his laughter mingling with hers as Emma clapped her hands in unconscious celebration. "A brother or sister for Emma," Sarah said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "A child who will have your blood as well as your name." Daniel placed his hand over hers, his heart full to bursting. "Blood doesn't matter," he said firmly. "Emma is mine in every way that counts. This baby will simply be another blessing, another life to love." Sarah's eyes filled with tears at his words. "How did I get so lucky?" she wondered aloud. "To find a man like you in the middle of a blizzard when all hope seemed lost," Daniel smiled, remembering that fateful day when a desperate woman carrying a baby wrapped in rags had changed his life forever. "Maybe it wasn't luck," he suggested. "Maybe it was meant to be." As spring bloomed fully into summer, news finally reached them of Mr. Benson. The storekeeper's wife, visiting to help Sarah with preserving the garden's early bounty, shared the gossip that had traveled along with the latest shipment of goods. "That boarding house in Willow Creek has closed," she reported as they worked. "Seems Mr. Benson was caught in a compromising position with a young widow who was staying there. Mrs. Benson threw him out, sold the place, and moved back east to live with her sister." Sarah's hand stilled on the green beans she was trimming. "So he's gone. Gone and good riddance from what I hear," the storekeeper's wife confirmed. "That man had a reputation, though few would say it to his face. You weren't the first young woman he troubled, just the only one smart enough to get away before things got worse." Later, when they were alone, Daniel found Sarah standing by the window, her hand resting on her growing belly as she gazed out at the summer evening. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and drawing her back against his chest. "Penny for your thoughts," he murmured, his chin resting on top of her head. Sarah leaned into his embrace, her hands covering his. I was thinking about how different things might have been, she admitted. If I hadn't left Willow Creek that day, if the storm hadn't come when it did, if you hadn't found us. But I did find you, Daniel reminded her, turning her gently to face him. And now you never have to be afraid again. This is your home, Sarah, our home. Sarah's smile was tinged with wonder, as if she still couldn't quite believe her good fortune. I know, she said softly. And every day I thank God for leading us to you, for the coat you wrapped around us, and the love you've given us ever since. Daniel bent to kiss her, his hand gentle on the swell of their coming child. Outside, the setting sun painted the prairie in hues of gold and rose, a fitting backdrop to the love that had bloomed in the harshest of winters and now flourished in the fullness of summer. As August ripened toward September, the Blackwood homestead prepared for its newest addition. Daniel finished the cradle he'd been crafting from cedar, its surfaces sanded satin smooth and adorned with carved wildflowers. Sarah, her movements slower now with the weight of her pregnancy, sewed tiny garments and quilted a blanket for the baby, while Emma, now toddling confidently around the cabin, patted her mother's rounded belly and solemnly informed it that she was the big sister. Their nearest neighbors, a family who lived 5 miles to the east, promised that their oldest daughter would come stay when Sarah's time drew near. The girl had helped at several births and would be able to assist until the midwife could arrive from town. The days passed in peaceful anticipation, the rhythms of farm life continuing despite the coming change. Daniel brought in the hay harvest, stored root vegetables for the winter ahead, and began preparations for the cattle sale that would provide their income for the year. Sarah preserved the garden's bounty, filling shelves with jars of beans, tomatoes, and fruit that would see them through the cold months. In the evenings, they would often sit on the porch Daniel had added to the cabin, watching Emma chase fireflies in the yard as the heat of the day gradually yielded to the cool of night. In these quiet moments, they would talk of the future, making plans for their growing family and the homestead that was flourishing under their joint care. I was thinking, Daniel said one such evening, his arm around Sarah as they watched the first stars appear, that we might plant an orchard next spring. Apple trees along the south slope, maybe some plums too. They'd take a few years to bear, but it would be good to have our own fruit. Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand absently stroking her belly where the baby kicked energetically. I'd like that, she agreed. Something permanent, something that will grow along with our children. Daniel covered her hand with his own, feeling the strong movements of their child. He's active tonight, he observed, using the pronoun they'd settled on, though they had no way of knowing whether Emma would have a brother or a sister. Like his father, Sarah teased. Always in motion, always building something. Daniel chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple, or like his mother, who never sits still if there's work to be done. Emma toddled up to them then, her small face alight with excitement as she held out her cupped hands. Look, Da caught it. Daniel lifted her onto his lap, carefully opening her fingers to reveal the glowing firefly within. Well done, sweetheart, he praised. Now we should let it go so it can find its family. Emma considered this seriously, then nodded and opened her hands wide. The firefly hesitated for a moment before taking flight, its light blinking as it rose into the gathering darkness. Bye-bye, Emma called after it, waving her dimpled hand. Sarah laughed softly, the sound more precious to Daniel than any music. She has your kind heart, she told him, her eyes shining with love as she looked from daughter to husband. Daniel shook his head, his throat tight with emotion. She has yours, he corrected. I'm just following your example. Later that night, as they lay in bed with the windows open to catch the late summer breeze, Sarah suddenly gasped and sat up, her hands going to her belly. "What is it?" Daniel asked, instantly alert. "Is it time?" Sarah shook her head, then guided his hand to a spot low on her abdomen. "Feel that, I think. I think he's turned. The midwife said he needed to turn head down before birth." Daniel felt the firm shape beneath his palm, different from the previous times he'd felt the baby move. "Is that good? Does it mean soon?" "Soon," Sarah confirmed, her voice a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "The midwife said probably within the week once the baby turns." Daniel sat up and lit the lamp, his heart suddenly racing. "Should I go for the neighbor girl now, or the midwife?" Sarah laughed, pulling him back to her side. "Not yet, my love. There's time. I'll know when it's truly beginning." Despite her reassurance, Daniel slept fitfully that night, one part of his mind always alert for any sound of distress from Sarah. By morning, nothing had changed except his level of anxiety, which Sarah gently teased him about as they went about their daily routines. "You're more nervous than I am," she observed as he dropped the same cup twice while helping with breakfast. "One of us should be," Daniel retorted, though he smiled as he said it. "You're too calm by half." Sarah's expression softened. "I'm not calm inside," she admitted, "but I have faith. In God, in the midwife's skill, and most of all in you. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Her confidence steadied him, and Daniel returned to his work with renewed focus, though he stayed closer to the house than usual in the days that followed. Their neighbor's daughter, Mary, arrived 3 days later, a capable 16-year-old with a practical manner that further reassured both expectant parents. "First babies often take their time," she told them as she helped Sarah with the mending, "but everything looks to be progressing normally." The waiting stretched Daniel's nerves to their limit, but Sarah remained serene, her body making its preparations while she continued to care for Emma and manage the household with Mary's help. And then, just as twilight was fading into true darkness on a warm September evening, Sarah called quietly to Daniel from the doorway of their bedroom. "It's time," she said simply, one hand braced against the doorframe. "Mary's heating water. Will you take Emma to the neighbors as we planned?" Daniel moved with the swift efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times. He gathered Emma, still drowsy from sleep, wrapped her in a blanket, and saddled his fastest horse. The ride to the neighbor's home and back took less than an hour, but to Daniel, it felt like an eternity. When he returned, he found Mary bustling about the cabin, carrying linens and hot water to the bedroom. From behind the closed door came the sound of Sarah's rhythmic breathing, punctuated occasionally by a low moan. "How is she?" Daniel demanded, his hat still in his hands. Mary glanced at him appraisingly. "Doing well. First babies usually take a while. I've sent word to town for the midwife, but Sarah says not to worry if she doesn't make it in time." The girl hesitated, then added kindly, "She's asking for you." Daniel didn't need to be told twice. He crossed to the bedroom door and entered quietly, his heart clenching at the sight of Sarah pacing slowly around the room, her face contorted with pain as another contraction seized her. "I'm here," he said, moving to her side and offering his arm for support. "What can I do?" Sarah's fingers dug into his forearm as she breathed through the pain. When it passed, she looked up at him with a wan smile. "Just stay with me, talk to me, help me remember why we're doing this." For the hours that followed, Daniel remained at her side, supporting her as she walked, bathing her face with cool cloths when she rested, and murmuring encouragement through each increasingly powerful contraction. The midwife arrived shortly before midnight, her experienced hands examining Sarah briefly before pronouncing that everything was progressing well. "Not long now," she assured them both. "The baby's in perfect position." As the night deepened toward dawn, Sarah's labor intensified. Daniel held her as she worked to bring their child into the world, his admiration for her strength and courage growing with each passing moment. And then, just as the first light of day crept through the bedroom window, a new cry joined Sarah's final, triumphant effort, the lusty wail of a newborn announcing its arrival. "A boy," the midwife proclaimed, lifting the red-faced, squalling infant for them to see. "A fine, healthy son." Daniel stared in wonder at the tiny, perfect being that was his son, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. Sarah reached up to touch his cheek, her own face radiant despite her exhaustion. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "Our son." "Our son," Daniel repeated, his voice choked with emotion. "You did it, Sarah. You incredible, amazing woman." The midwife cleaned and swaddled the baby, then placed him in Sarah's arms. Daniel sat beside them on the bed, one arm around his wife, the other hand gently stroking his son's downy head. "What shall we call him?" Sarah asked, looking up at Daniel with love shining in her eyes. Daniel considered the tiny face, already showing signs of Sarah's delicate features mixed with something that might one day resemble his own stronger bone structure. "What about Samuel?" he suggested. "After your father." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Samuel Daniel Blackwood," she said softly. "A good, strong name for a good, strong boy." As the new day brightened outside their window, Daniel Blackwood looked at his family, his brave, beautiful wife, and their perfect son, and knew that his life's journey had led him exactly where he was meant to be. From the solitary man who had once ridden alone through a blizzard to the husband and father who now held his world in his arms, the transformation was complete. When Emma returned home that afternoon, brought by the neighbor's son, her initial wariness of the new baby quickly gave way to fascination. Daniel lifted her carefully onto the bed beside Sarah, watching as his daughter reached out a tentative finger to touch her brother's tiny hand. "Baby," Emma said solemnly. "My baby." "Your brother," Sarah corrected gently. "Samuel, can you say Samuel, Sam?" Emma decided after a moment's consideration. "My Sam," Daniel laughed, his heart so full it felt it might burst. "That works too," he agreed, ruffling Emma's blonde curls. "You're a big sister now, Emma. That's a very important job." Emma nodded, clearly taking this new responsibility seriously. "I help," she promised, leaning against Daniel's side as she continued to watch the baby with wide-eyed wonder. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of joy and exhaustion as the family adjusted to their newest member. Samuel proved to be a contented baby, nursing well and sleeping for stretches that allowed Sarah some much-needed rest. Daniel took on more of Emma's care, treasuring the special time with his daughter while Sarah recovered and bonded with their son. As September yielded to October, bringing the first hints of autumn coolness to the air, life at the Blackwood homestead settled into new rhythms. Daniel completed the fall cattle sale, returning with money that would see them comfortably through the winter and allow for improvements to the property in the spring. Sarah regained her strength, managing the household with her usual efficiency despite the demands of a newborn and an energetic toddler. One crisp October afternoon, as golden sunlight bathed the prairie in warm light, Daniel returned from the fields to find Sarah sitting on the porch with Samuel sleeping in her arms and Emma playing contentedly at her feet. The scene struck him with such profound gratitude that he stood for a moment, simply absorbing the picture of domestic tranquility that was now his life. Sarah looked up and saw him, her face lighting with a smile that still had the power to take his breath away. "You're early," she observed as he climbed the porch steps and bent to kiss her. "Finished the West Field faster than I expected," Daniel explained, settling beside her on the bench he'd built that summer. He tickled Samuel's tiny foot, smiling as the baby stirred in his sleep. "How are my best girls and boy today?" "We're well," Sarah assured him, leaning against his shoulder. "Emma helped me gather the last of the tomatoes, and Samuel has been sleeping like an angel." Emma abandoned her game and climbed onto Daniel's lap, her small hands patting his bearded cheeks. "Da home," she announced with satisfaction. "That's right, sweetheart," Daniel confirmed, hugging her close. "Da is home." The simple words held profound meaning for them both. Home was no longer just a place but these people, this family that had come together against all odds. Daniel thought back to that winter day, less than a year ago, when he'd spotted a desperate figure struggling through the snow. How could he have known then that his impulsive act of kindness, wrapping a coat around a stranger, and her baby would lead to such complete happiness? "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, noting his contemplative expression. Daniel smiled, pulling her closer with his free arm while Emma nestled against his chest. "I was thinking about coats," he said, "and how sometimes the most important journeys begin with the simplest actions." Sarah's eyes softened with understanding. "Your coat saved our lives that day," she acknowledged, "but it was your heart that saved our souls." As the afternoon light gilded the prairie grasses, and the wind whispered promises of seasons yet to come, the Blackwood family sat together on their porch, bound by love that had bloomed in the most unexpected of circumstances. And Daniel knew, with bone-deep certainty, that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together just as they had faced that long-ago blizzard, finding in each other the warmth and shelter they had all been seeking. "I love you," he said simply, the words encompassing Sarah, Emma, and the sleeping Samuel, his family, his heart, his home. Sarah's answer was in her eyes, in the gentle pressure of her head against his shoulder, in the way her hand sought his and held tight. "And we love you," she replied. "Always and forever." As the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the promise hung in the air between them, a testament to the journey that had brought them to this moment, and the path they would walk together in the years to come. From strangers in a storm to a family bound by love, their story had only just begun.